The president's been clear. We're working with our partners and allies and our national security team to look at all options. And as we've said, all options are on the table, but I'm not going to get ahead of anything the president may or may not do in response to what's taking place in Syria.
This coming as a European air traffic control agency is reportedly alerting airlines to exercise caution due to a potential airstrike in Syria in the next 3 days. Joining us now is national security analyst for the Clarion Project, professor of counterterrorism at Liberty University, Ryan Mauro. Ryan, you were previously a volunteer researcher for a Syria opposition group before the civil war started. What is your take on this? What does the U.S. need to do here?
Well, the immediate objective is to have some type of deterrent effect on Assad so that the chemical weapons attacks and other forms of attacks like the barrel bombs can be stopped. And that's very doable because he has a weak air force. We have the capability to strike at his shipments of fuel, the stuff that's coming in and out of the ports that the Russians have to use. So there's plenty of targets that are vulnerable. Hitting just a handful of them would have a dramatic effect on the ground, and it has to be more than punishment. What has to happen is that the dictator, Assad, has to actually look at the situation and say, my chances of losing this war go up when I do things like this, and therefore I'm going to stop doing it. And that's the calculation we have to aim for.
He doesn't have Russia on his side preventing that?
Well,
that big.
Russia did say, they came out this morning, I saw a news report that said they would retaliate, they would look to stop any missiles coming to Syria, and they would strike any places where those missiles were coming from.
We've heard that every time there's been some type of confrontation with a Russian ally. That's kind of just how they talk. And if you look at what happened with the airstrike last year, we gave a warning to the Russians. They got their people out so that there weren't casualties. There was an arrangement. And giving that heads up doesn't really make much of a difference if you're going after hard targets because you can't pick those up, and that's really what you're going after.
This is more aggressive than that, though. In other words, what you're talking about is a step up from what we did last year. So there has to be more risk involved with it, no?
There is. Anytime you have a greater number of strikes, there's a greater number of risk, obviously. But especially if it's missiles coming from the sea and hitting these parts, especially the shipments, so that you can't get supplies in and out, that's very doable, and it's not something that Russia's going to want to risk a war over. Will they try to shoot down some cruise missiles, maybe launch a cyber attack? Probably, because Putin always has to, at the end of the day, be able to say, look, there's the proof that America is weak, and I am the future of the world. You give them this,
What is the end objective here? Because we had one strike on an airfield last year. There was a chlorine gas attack early this year in January, which our response was essentially a letter from the State Department. There was no force taken at all. And that sends a message to Bashar al-Assad, does it not? So what is the end objective? To essentially take out the Air Force, Assad's Air Force here?
That's what I think it's going to be. It may not be the explicit objective of saying no more planes in the sky at all, but it'll be to at least cripple it to the point where there is a difference on the ground, and that advantage is lost by Assad, and that increases the pressure on him. And in the past, when it looked like Assad was going to lose significant territory, the Russian tone did change. They would say, we like Assad, he's our friend, but we are not dedicated only to him. And you would actually have people opposed to Assad that were going over to Russia. So Russia wants a puppet state. They want a military base there. If they think Assad is a loser, they'll look to someone else. So I don't rule out the possibility of cooperating with the Russians in the future if we handle this very carefully.
But this coalition, the coalition build, though, is fairly easy. I mean, do you think that the journals talk about France, like the UK, Saudi Arabia?
Coalition is done.
Yeah, that's all.
So many people hate Assad that's just a matter of a few phone calls. I am concerned about what allies we get involved in this, like Qatar, a supposed ally that supports every enemy of ours. Turkey, especially. Turkey always demands that we ditch our allies, the Kurds, and their alliance that includes Christians. So I get worried about the influence of these partners giving us bad advice for their own selfish aims. But I think we should, particularly in northern Syria, double down on the Kurds and their alliance there, because you're actually seeing the beginnings of a democratic future in that part of Syria. It's an amazing story that's not told.
Just one last thing before we move on to another topic, but in terms of Syria, does this mean the U.S. is not getting out of Syria, as President Trump? Because, again, President Trump linked that to ISIS being on the run. But this is the most serious problem for the Syrian people, is the leader who's still there. Are we there for maybe even a few years to come?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because even if he were to go back to the original position and say, look, Assad's not a concern anymore, my concern is just ISIS, There are terrorist groups even worse than ISIS right now in Syria, including Al-Qaeda, which basically has an army of 20 to 25,000 people that they've never had before. And there's other groups. So any type of policy that focuses solely on ISIS is problematic to me because I see what's coming around the corner, and it could be worse.
And I was critical for years of the foreign policy and the position of the Obama administration, that they created this power vacuum overseas, and the suggestion that we're getting out of Syria would do the very same thing.
And it's a terrible signal to send also, especially when you don't have benchmarks and saying we're going to accomplish A, B, and C before that happens.
Right. I want to move on. Ryan, switch gears to back here at home. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes calling out the Justice Department for failing to provide an unredacted two-page document. This was an electronic communication used to formally begin the Russia probe. The California congressman laying out the potential consequences last night on the Ingram angle.
I can just tell you that we're not going to just hold in contempt. We will have a plan to hold in contempt and to impeach.
To impeach Christopher Wray?
Absolutely.
Rod Rosenstein?
We're not messing around here.
Ryan, your reaction to that?
This type of stuff drives me crazy with the government bureaucracies because whether they're trying to cover up something or they're just being difficult, this is actually a threat to our democracy. Move beyond the issue of Trump and the politics of the day. This is the type of thing that members of Congress, researchers like myself, encounter constantly, where you ask for something reasonable, they refuse to give it to you, they fight to the death to not give it to you, and then when you get it, it's a redacted piece of paper with like 2 words, the and a, and then you have to go over and fight it over again. There is a major crisis of transparency in the government that this is touching upon beyond the politics of today with the whole probe with Russia.
I wonder, though, in just listening to what Nunes said there, if there's some, or at least it's worth questioning whether or not there's some aspect of Nunes doing the president's bidding here on the question of Rosenstein and the question of Chris Wray, who the president's talked openly about in the last few days of getting rid of, for lack of a better term. So that's where Nunes is talking about it on a different subject, but he said we won't hold back, we won't go after these guys, and I don't know if those two are related. But it'd be interesting to watch. I don't know what you think of that, though.
But if they did their job, it wouldn't be if Wray and Rosenstein did their job and didn't act like they were trying to hide something about this investigation, it would be a moot point. And you couldn't make that connection between the president and his legal problems and what's going on within the FBI and the DOJ in terms of, well, stonewalling.
Yeah, I agree. And just all the parties involved in this, I'm really greatly disappointed because whether you're a supporter of the president or you're against them, whoever's representing you right now, the dialogue that goes along with it, I find to be destructive. I mean, the morale right now at the FBI, deal with FBI personnel constantly, I've never seen it so low. And so even from Trump's side, some of the rhetoric I'm seeing it really does bother me when I see how that impacts people who sacrifice a lot, not just risking their lives, but look at what this type of service does to their marriages, their family, sacrifice a lot, and then they get basically branded as an agency as a whole as being politicized or corrupt. And by the way, we're talking about classified information. So that's why I don't make these final assessments as to, what happened or didn't happen, because 90% of what you're talking about is not available to you.
Ryan, good to see you. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. You covered a lot of ground for us, Ryan Mauro.